Welcome back, everyone, to part 2 of informational writing, where this session focuses on the elements of the discourse. And so with that, I'm going to turn things over to Becky, and we will get started with this part of the session.
So, elements of informational writing. It all starts with that meaningful topic, and our heads are full of meaningful topics. They will range from curricular knowledge to interests that we have, but we know they all start with some kind of main idea that gets elaborated with details. Some of them can be very general. You can ask your kids to think about things that they know a lot about, and that could be their topic, or it could be specific, an animal that they choose to write about. But we want to make sure that we're modeling for kids. You know, the use of meaningful topics in like a writer's notebook, where they would have a page and be thinking about what they know from school, what they know from outside of school, and create a list of topics for informational writing that they can use over that unit of study. So it starts with finding the topic. Secondly, helping them to organize and manage a piece. What we see a lot of times is that kids in informational writing will have a lot of good ideas, but they're in a mixed up order, or some of them don't even relate to the topic. So this is like a critical piece of informational writing. And it can start by supporting them, by giving them assigned topics. I like this graphic because it gives a model for maybe a class book on a certain animal. I think as people are talking about publishing and how hard it is to get all kids to publish, consider an informational writing, doing a class book where, given a certain animal that you've decided on, that, you know, one group just investigates the diet, another group talks about habitat, another group talks about enemies, and that by different groups taking different parts, you end up with a good example and experience of informative writing. As kids get older, and more experienced, then they will be able to identify their own topics that they would be using. Another tool for managing and organizing is the use of a planning map. This is out of a walkie, and it does have the grade level at the top, although when we put these resources on the hub, the grade level is taken off. But when kids are planning their writing, this would be a place where they could record the pieces of information that they're going to develop as they work toward a published piece of informational text.
Based on the responses from the narrative text type feedback, these maps are being widely used. We love that they are being tried and used as anchor charts in classrooms. So we once again have put informational maps on our Literacy Hub for you to download. And just a reminder for those that are interested in making those into large posters, I know we addressed this in the Google Hangout, but I want to just reiterate that information, you would go on First Class, and under the District Info CIAPD folder, there's a downloadable form that you then just upload the map to, and that map will get sent laminated to you in poster form from ISC. So we hope that you'll use these once again and display them as examples of learning in your classroom as you teach informational writing.
So using a planning map is another really important way of organizing an informational text. The last part is actually helping kids to sharpen their focus. This would be a topic taken from the child's interest area. Maybe the kid is all about basketball, but as he's thinking about basketball, he's got to be careful to have a roadmap with it, because honestly, he could write about how to play basketball. That could be the whole piece. He could write about the most important skills of basketball. He could write about equipment in basketball. He could write about famous players in basketball. You know, giving time for kids to talk to each other, where they're using this V-shaped focus to help them to brainstorm and move into a sharper focus is really important. So as he talks about all the various things he could say about basketball, he's got to decide on one of those. So let's say he decides on famous players. Then he'd have to think, well, I could write about famous players from long ago, or I could write about famous players today. And he probably would think, well, what do I know the most about? And in the end, as he's talking, he will make a decision that maybe what he's going to write about in basketball is famous players today. So we call this sharpening the focus. This we know is so huge in organizing and managing informational text with kids. So after we have a meaningful topic and we've got a good focus, now we're ready to develop the content. And with our little first graders, I bet they can write some facts about silkworms. They maybe can even write definitions of the stages of metamorphosis. Some of them, I'll bet, can even give details. Maybe details in the visuals, the pictures, or details in print. But as kids get better at elaborating, more sophisticated and older, they'll be able to add examples, quotations, other information. Another way of developing the content is helping them to take kernels of meaning, a sentence fragment sometimes, or just a simple sentence, and help them through words to give more detail so that the author is able to develop a richer picture in the mind of that reader, which is really important in keeping the engagement in informational writing. Sometimes asking kids just to do a free write on the topic or a free draw, and what may emerge is information that they knew that in the beginning they weren't aware of, but that can help to develop the content. And lastly, sometimes we just need to go back to some of the books and check and gain more information so that we really can flush out a well-developed informational piece. The last piece that's really, really specific to informational text type is the use of illustrations and other media. And remember, you know, in our reading of informational text types, we will notice and we will talk about how the author is trying to explain and clarify through the illustrations and the media. He's trying to explain the concepts and clarify those concepts for that goal of really teaching the audience what he or she wants them to learn. So this is the one actually that ties back into the speaking and listening, the presentation section of speaking and listening Common Core strategy skills. And so it refers to anchor number 5, which is to make strategic use of digital media and visual displays of data to express information and to enhance understanding of presentations. This is big. And I'll be honest with you, I really did not know what this meant for a long time. But as Owaki will tell us, formatting and media is used to enrich a text, to help that reader to understand it. And these are our choices. You know, this, you can look at this and say, whoa, this is pretty overwhelming that they've got to know this for standard number 5. And especially like grade 4 and 5, you're heavily into the use of this. You'll notice this as we look at grade level criteria. But Owaki warns us that to support your students in expanding their repertoire skills in this area, you just demonstrate one technique at a time as it fits into your model writing. And then the kids will use that same technique in their writing that goes with your mini lesson. But over time, kids will not only be able to recognize and understand why authors do this in their reading of informational text, but also in the use of them in their writing of informational text. So here are other illustrations in media. The sidebars for defining domain-specific vocabulary. That's a really good one. Common Core has us students capturing, doing photo captures and hyperlinking that, or video captures Even already at third, fourth grade, they're hyperlinking to website addresses. Kids are using charts with labels and interpretive narrative. So to try and explain what that graphic means. Graphs, maps, diagrams. So our students are taking a leap in the writing of informative text, that these are things now that we expect them to create as they share information and teach through their writing. So the first four criteria that I showed you are really, really specific to informational text, finding your topic, organizing and managing that piece, developing the content, and using illustrations and other media. But the remaining three, you're likely to say, we did this in narrative. Crafting a title is the next one. And we know that titles disclose some key information about the content and about the genre of a piece. And they give you a hint of, what's going to stand out in that piece. All of these are titles about monkeys. And I've already sorted them according to genre. This kind of helps you to really isolate titles and help kids to define what makes them strong, what makes them weak, what are characteristics of titles in one genre versus another one. All of these are classic informational text titles. Here's your fiction ones, and this is poetry. People will say, why is monkey see, monkey do spelled that way? Well, in poetry, everything rhymes, and you're playing with words. But as you have your kids analyze and evaluate titles, they will come to see how important and what creates strong titles or weak titles. Here's another element of informational text that, to me, we also did this in narrative, but we know introductions are like really important because they not only tell what the piece is about, but they've got to hook that reader to stay engaged. And so we talked about leads or introductions in narrative text type. Now we're talking about them in informational. And what we see is, that big list of establishing the situation for narrative. Many of those same leads are also used in informational text type. So Owaki, page 62, is going to give you that list. And man, your kids, I already hear people saying how their kids are getting good at identifying what kinds of leads authors are using. Here's from Bones, Steve Jenkins' book, Bones Are Alive. They'll get very good at saying, oh, that hook was a factor, a detail. Here out of Lincoln's, what Lincoln said, the world seemed wider and fairer before me. That was what Abraham Lincoln remembered the day he earned his first dollar. Quotation is an excellent way of bringing in and hooking that reader, keeping them engaged. Have you ever wondered about owls? Students will say, oh, that's a draw-in question. So as you create anchor charts with strong introductions, kids are going to pay attention to that. Oftentimes in their writer's notebooks, they will create model introductions, or they'll reproduce them in their notebook. And that's a really valuable resource because it gives them ideas then when they're using their own topic that they can imitate other people's leads, and it'll help them to create stronger introductions. The last piece of informative text is the sense of closure, and we talked about that in narrative as well. I think sometimes people think that all a closure is to just summarize what the author's already said about the content of the piece. But a closure really is to stimulate the reader's thinking after they've read the text. So when we talk about, what kinds of thinking does a reader do before they read, while they read, and after, your closure is going to be key in the kind of thinking that they do after. So here is an example of an anchor chart. The teacher has recorded from different literature that the students know and have read, and they've named the different kinds of endings. Owaki has your list on page 63 for informational writing as well. And so we see in narrative the closures that Owaki gave us, and some of them are also repeated in informative text writing as well. So you've got the elements of informational discourse, and we all know it all begins with the ear. So it begins with the listening to informational text, and Owaki has defined all the different formats now, and that we know we want kids hearing informational text in whole group. We want them reading it in small group and reading it independently. We know that the development of the ear, the oral understanding of informative text, develops before the reading understanding of informative text, and this is where it all begins. Owaki gives you on page 64 a list of questions that are going to help to have kids name and notice the criteria of informative text type. Allie has put those on the hub as question cards that is accessible for teachers. Some teachers make them for small groups, so students can be using these and identifying the criteria of their text type, because eventually we want kids to be able to know this and recognize these in their reading. All of that will help to make the next step easier. And the next step is our anchor. Number 2, to write informative and explanatory texts, to examine and convey complex ideas and information clearly and accurately through the effective selection, organization, and analysis of content. And
so we're going to end at this point for this video segment, and the next video will pick up where this left off, focusing on the grade level criteria for you and your learning.